The massive doors of the Galactic Tribunal chamber slid open with a deep, resonating hum. The sound echoed through the crystalline walls like a funeral bell. Inside, representatives from 12 different worlds sat in tiered seating that spiraled up toward a domed ceiling filled with swirling nebulae. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering, carved from a single piece of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. But today, that light seemed dimmed by the presence of the figure shuffling through the entrance. Commander Velthar had once been the pride of the Corvani military. His species was known throughout the galaxy for their warrior culture, their tactical brilliance, and their nearly indestructible carapaces that gleamed like polished sapphires. Corvani officers commanded respect wherever they went, their four eyes capable of tracking multiple targets simultaneously, their powerful claws able to tear through steel plating. The creature that entered the chamber bore little resemblance to that proud heritage. Velthar's carapace, once a brilliant blue that reflected light like water, was now dull and scarred. Deep gouges ran across his chest and arms, some so deep they had never properly healed. His left arm hung at an awkward angle, the joint damaged beyond repair. Most disturbing of all were his eyes. Where once 4 bright orbs had blazed with intelligence and determination, now only hollow, lifeless spheres remained. The light had gone out of them completely. The assembled delegates watched his approach with a mixture of curiosity and revulsion. The Zephyrian ambassador's crystalline form chimed softly in what might have been disapproval. The hulking Graxan representative's multiple arms twitched nervously. Even the typically stoic Vortani delegate's metallic features showed signs of unease. As Velthar reached the center of the chamber, his damaged leg gave out. He stumbled, catching himself against the witness stand with a sharp crack of claw against metal. The sound made several representatives flinch. For a moment, the only noise in the chamber was Velthar's labored breathing. High Arbiter Quindos observed the scene from her elevated position. Her species, the Aquari, were known for their diplomatic skills and their ability to remain calm under pressure. Her translucent tentacles moved in slow, hypnotic patterns as she processed what she was seeing. Even she seemed disturbed by Velthar's condition. "This tribunal is now in session," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of 1,000 years of galactic law. "The defendant will identify himself for the record." Velthar raised his head slowly. When he spoke, his voice was like gravel scraping against stone. "Commander Velthar, formerly of the 3rd Corvani Battle Fleet, serial designation 7749, commanding officer of the Dreadnought Void's Edge." He paused, his breathing ragged. "Sole survivor of the Terror Campaign." The chamber erupted in whispers. The Terror Campaign was legendary, but not in the way military victories usually were. It was whispered about in the darkest corners of military academies, spoken of only in classified briefings. Most delegates knew only fragments of the story, pieces of intelligence reports that painted an incomplete and terrifying picture. A human world had been attacked. A human world had fought back, and somehow an entire Corvani battle fleet had been reduced to a single survivor. "Order," Quindos commanded, her tentacles flashing with bioluminescent authority. "The defendant will explain his presence before this tribunal." Velthar's mandibles clicked together slowly. In Corvani culture, this was usually a sign of amusement, but there was nothing amusing about the sound he made. It was hollow, broken, like the echo of laughter in an empty tomb. "Stand accused of war crimes," he said, his voice growing slightly stronger. "Crimes against civilian populations, violation of the Galactic Combat Accords, use of prohibited weapons against non-combatants." He looked up at the assembled delegates, his dead eyes somehow still managing to convey a terrible intensity. "The charges are accurate. I did all of these things. But before you pass judgment, you need to understand what we faced on Terra." Representative Kexthor of the militant caste leaned forward. His species prided themselves on being the galaxy's premier warriors, and he was eager to hear how the Corvani had failed where his people surely would have succeeded. "The Corvani military is considered among the finest in the galaxy," Kexthor said, his voice booming through the chamber's acoustics. "What enemy could possibly reduce your entire fleet to a single survivor?" Velthar's clicking grew more rapid, more frantic. "Enemy? You think we faced an enemy? No, representative. We faced something far worse than an enemy. We faced humans, learning how to fight." The chamber fell silent again, but this time the silence was different. It was the silence of predators suddenly realizing they might be prey. "Tell us about this learning," Quindos said carefully. Velthar gripped the witness stand with both claws, his knuckles whitening with the pressure. "There was a human soldier. His name was Jae-sung, 23 years old by their measurement. I remember him because he was the first human I watched refuse to die." His voice took on a hypnotic quality, as if he were reliving the memory rather than simply recounting it. "We had established a perimeter around their capital city, standard siege tactics, designed to cut off supplies and force surrender. Jae-sung was positioned at what your tactical manuals would call an indefensible position, a narrow canyon pass, between two of our forward bases. His orders were simple: hold the position until reinforcements arrived." Velthar's claws scraped against the metal of the stand, leaving deep grooves. "Those reinforcements never came. We made sure of that. We cut off his communications, eliminated his supply lines, and surrounded his position with a full battalion. 300 of our finest warriors against one human boy with a damaged rifle and whatever supplies he could scavenge." The commander's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing the entire chamber to strain to hear him. He held that position for 6 hours. 6 hours against 300 Corvani warriors, but that's not the remarkable part. The remarkable part is how he did it. Representative Zalmoth of the Technical Guild interrupted. "Superior human technology. Advanced weapons. We were unaware of?" "No," Velthar replied, his voice now carrying a note of something that might have been admiration or terror. "Cleaning supplies." The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. Cleaning supplies? How could household chemicals stand against Corvani? Military might. Jae-sung turned their maintenance chemicals into explosives. He used their water recycling system to create a flood that channeled my troops into predetermined kill zones. He rigged their lighting system to create strobing effects that disrupted our visual tracking. Velthar's voice grew stronger as he continued, but most importantly, he learned. The clicking of his mandibles became almost musical. Every attack we made, he studied. Every tactic we employed, he countered. By the 4th hour, he was predicting our movements. By the 6th hour, he wasn't just defending anymore. He was hunting us. "One soldier?" Kexthor demanded. "One untrained civilian held off a Corvani battalion?" "That's just it," Velthar replied, turning his dead gaze toward the warrior representative. By the end of those 6 hours, Jae-sung wasn't untrained anymore. He had learned to fight like a Corvani. Then he learned to fight better than a Corvani. The broken commander straightened slightly, a shadow of his former military bearing returning. "You want to judge me for war crimes? Then judge the species that turned warfare itself into their greatest teacher. Judge the humans who made killing into an art form, not through training or tradition, but through pure, terrifying adaptation." His voice rose to fill the chamber, carrying with it the weight of nightmares that would never end. Jae-sung died in that canyon, but not before he taught us the first lesson about human warfare. They don't just fight to win. They fight to learn how to win better next time. The War Council had been confident. Velthar remembered that day clearly, sitting in the command center of the Corvani flagship Eternal Dominion as Admiral Kesrath presented the intelligence reports. The holographic displays showed a blue-green world orbiting a modest yellow star, with primitive orbital installations and a scattered fleet of what could barely be called warships. "Third planet of the Sol system," Admiral Kesrath had announced, his 4 eyes gleaming with anticipated victory. "The humans call it Terra or Earth, population approximately 8 billion. Technology level, barely spacefaring. Their largest vessels are cargo haulers converted for military use." The assembled commanders had clicked their mandibles in amusement. 8 billion beings living on a single world, with no proper fleet to defend them. It would be like crushing insects. "Resistance is expected to be minimal," the Admiral continued. "Intelligence suggests they have no experience with large-scale combat. Their military is divided into small tribal factions they call nations. They've never faced a unified galactic threat. Velthar had felt a surge of disappointment. The Third Fleet was the pride of the Corvani Empire, equipped with the finest weapons and crewed by the most experienced warriors. Using such a force against primitive humans seemed like overkill. How wrong they had been. The journey to the Sol system took 3 weeks through hyperspace. During that time, Velthar studied the intelligence reports, learning about human culture, their simple technologies, their divided governments. Everything pointed to a species that would surrender within hours of the first orbital bombardment. When they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, Velthar's first view of Terra was exactly what he expected. A beautiful but vulnerable world, with small space stations and a handful of primitive ships moving between the inner planets. The humans had detected their arrival immediately and were broadcasting on multiple frequencies. Unknown vessels, this is Earth Defense Command. You are entering sovereign space. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. Admiral Kesrath had laughed at the transmission. Sovereign space? They think they own an entire star system with that pitiful fleet. The human broadcasts continued for hours, growing more urgent but never aggressive. They requested diplomatic contact, offered to send ambassadors, even suggested trade negotiations. They seemed desperate to avoid conflict. It was all an act. The Corvani fleet moved into attack formation, their massive dreadnoughts taking position above Terra's orbital installations. The humans continued their broadcasts right up until the moment Admiral Kesrath gave the order to begin the bombardment. That's when everything went wrong. The first wave of missiles had barely left their launch tubes when the human orbital stations began transmitting on Corvani military frequencies. Not random signals, but actual Corvani tactical codes. Somehow, in the few hours since the fleet's arrival, the humans had broken their encryption. "Sir, we're receiving orders to abort the attack," reported the communications officer, his voice confused. "The orders are coming from High Command, but they're originating from the human stations." Admiral Kesrath's eyes blazed with fury. "Impossible! Our codes are changed daily and encrypted with quantum algorithms. No primitive species could break them in such a short time." But the transmissions continued. Worse, they were specific. The fake orders contained accurate information about ship positions, crew assignments, even personal details about individual commanders. The humans weren't just jamming communications, they were demonstrating complete penetration of Corvani military systems. "Sir, I'm reading multiple missile locks from the surface," the tactical officer reported. "They're targeting our command bridges specifically." The missiles that rose from Terra's surface were crude by Corvani standards, but they moved with impossible precision. Each one was aimed at a specific vulnerable point on the Corvani ships, targeting communication arrays, sensor clusters, and command centers with surgical accuracy. "Evasive maneuvers," Admiral Kesrath commanded. "All ships, defensive pattern." Alpha 7. The order was broadcast on the fleet's secure channels. 30 seconds later, human missiles adjusted their courses to intercept the ship's new positions. The humans were reading their tactical communications in real time. That's when Velthar first heard the name Bo Young. "This is Lieutenant Commander Bo Young of Earth Defense Station 3, came a calm voice over the Corvani command frequency. "We've been monitoring your communications since your arrival. Your encryption is interesting, but not particularly challenging." The voice spoke in perfect Corvani, using military terminology with casual precision. On the tactical display, Velthar could see Defense Station 3, a small orbital platform that should have been destroyed in the first wave of bombardment. Instead, it was very much intact and apparently controlling the entire human defense network. "We're going to ask you to leave our system," Bo Young continued. "We have no desire for conflict, but we're prepared to defend ourselves if necessary." Admiral Kesrath was furious. "One primitive station thinks it can threaten the entire Third Fleet. Target that station immediately." But when the Corvani ships moved to target Defense Station 3, their own weapon systems began malfunctioning. Targeting computers displayed false information. Weapon batteries rotated to random directions. Several ships found their missiles locking onto their own fleetmates. "Sir, we're getting reports from all ships," the communications officer said, his voice tight with panic. "They've lost control of their weapon systems. The computers are responding to external commands." On the main display, Velthar watched in horror as the human named Bo Young systematically took control of the most advanced fleet in the galaxy. She wasn't just blocking their communications, she was rewriting their software in real time, turning their ships into elaborate toys for her amusement. "How is this possible?" Admiral Kesrath demanded. "Our systems are isolated from external networks. They can't be hacked remotely." "Actually, they can." Bo Young's voice came through the speakers again. "Your quantum encryption relies on predictable mathematical sequences. Once we identified the pattern, breaking it was just a matter. Curve computational power. We've been building quantum computers for decades." The casual way she explained it made it sound simple, but Velthar understood the implications. The humans had reverse-engineered in hours what had taken the Corvani centuries to develop. Not only that, they had improved on it. "You have approximately 4 hours to leave our system," Bo Young continued. "After that, we'll be forced to take more direct action." Admiral Kesrath's pride wouldn't let him retreat. "All ships, prepare for orbital bombardment. We'll glass their planet from orbit." "I wouldn't recommend that," Bo Young replied. "We've just finished uploading a virus to your navigation computers. If you attempt to bombard the surface, your ships will automatically jump into our sun. The program is already installed and can't be removed without completely rebuilding your computer cores." The threat was delivered in the same calm, professional tone she'd used throughout the conversation. But the tactical display confirmed her words. Every ship in the fleet was showing navigation errors, their computers locked onto the Sol systems. "Star, you're bluffing," Admiral Kesrath said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Test me," Bo Young replied simply. The silence that followed was deafening. The most powerful fleet in Corvani space had been neutralized by a single human on a primitive orbital station. But as Velthar would learn, this was just the beginning. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the surface," the communications officer reported. "It's on a civilian frequency." The image that appeared on the main screen showed a young human male in what appeared to be a government building. He was surrounded by displays showing the orbital battle, and his expression was grimly determined. "This is Hyunwoo of the Terran Defense Council," he said. "I believe you've met Lieutenant Commander Bo Young. She's been kind enough to demonstrate our defensive capabilities." Velthar felt a chill run through his carapace. If Bo Young was just a demonstration, what was the real threat? "We've been studying your species since your arrival," Hyunwoo continued. "Your tactics, your technology, your military doctrine, we've found them quite instructive." After the orbital battle, Velthar had assumed command of the ground forces. Admiral Kesrath had been killed when his ship's navigation system malfunctioned during a retreat attempt, sending his dreadnought straight into an asteroid field. The official report would later claim it was enemy action, but Velthar knew the truth. The humans had turned their own technology against them. Now, standing on the surface of Terra with 3 full divisions of Corvani warriors, Velthar felt confident that the ground war would be different. In space, the humans had advantages. They could hack systems, disrupt communications, and use their knowledge of physics against the Corvani fleet. But on the ground, it would be warrior against warrior, claw against weapon. This was where the Corvani excelled. The human capital city sprawled before them, a massive urban center that housed nearly 20 million inhabitants. Intelligence reports identified it as the planetary government's primary command center. Capturing it would break human resistance and force a swift surrender. Velthar had studied the city's layout carefully. It was built in a valley between 2 mountain ranges, with only 3 main roads leading in or out. The perfect target for a siege. His forces had established checkpoints on all major routes, cutting off supply lines and communication networks. Within days, the humans would be starving and desperate. That's when he first encountered Hyunwoo's work. The human appeared on their intercepted communications 3 days into the siege. Unlike Bo Young's technical precision, this human spoke with the calm authority of someone accustomed to command. His image showed a man in his early 30s wearing simple civilian clothes, standing in what appeared to be a government emergency center. "Commander Velthar," Hyunwoo had said, looking directly into the camera as if he could see through the transmission. "I understand you've taken command of the ground forces. I'm Hyunwoo, and I'll be coordinating our city's defense." Velthar had been surprised by the directness. Most species, when facing superior force, either surrendered immediately or made desperate threats. Yunwu did neither. He simply introduced himself like they were business partners meeting for the first time. "Your siege tactics are quite good," Yunwu continued. "Textbook approach, cut off supplies, isolate the population, wait for morale to break. It's worked for your species for centuries, hasn't it?" The human smiled, and something about that expression made Velthar's carapace tingle with unease. "The thing is, we've been studying your military history. Every campaign, every victory, every tactical manual your species has produced. We know exactly how you fight, Commander. The question is whether you know how we fight." Before Velthar could respond, the transmission ended. For the next 2 days, nothing happened. The siege continued as planned. Corvani forces held their positions, supply lines remained cut, and the city remained isolated. Everything was proceeding according to doctrine. Then the evacuations began. It started small, a few hundred civilians approaching the Corvani checkpoints under white flags of surrender. Families with children, elderly humans, merchants with empty carts. They claimed to be fleeing the city, seeking refugee status with the occupying forces. Velthar's officers were puzzled. Why would the humans send their most vulnerable population to surrender? It made no tactical sense. But the galactic combat, their codes required humane treatment of non-combatants, so the Corvani established refugee camps in the territories they controlled. Within a week, thousands of humans had evacuated the city. They scattered across the occupied zones, setting up temporary settlements wherever the Corvani allowed them. The elderly were placed in camps near supply depots. Families with children were housed near communication centers. Merchants were given areas close to main transport routes. Velthar began to feel uneasy about the whole situation, but he couldn't identify why. The humans weren't acting like refugees. They were too organized, too purposeful, and they seemed far too interested in their surroundings. He noticed it first with an elderly human female named Grandma Park. She had been assigned to a refugee camp near the main ammunition depot, and she spent her days sitting outside her tent, seemingly doing nothing but watching the world go by. When questioned, she claimed to be knitting, working on blankets for the younger refugees, but Velthar noticed that her hands moved in patterns that didn't match any knitting technique he'd ever seen. Her fingers tapped against her knitting needles in complex rhythms, almost like she was counting something, and her eyes never stopped moving, tracking every vehicle, every patrol, every supply convoy that passed through the area. It was the same, everywhere. Children playing games that somehow always positioned them near strategic locations, merchants who seemed far too interested in the schedules of supply runs, families who asked innocent questions about patrol routes and guard rotations. By the end of the week, Velthar realized the horrible truth. The humans hadn't evacuated their civilians, they had positioned them. Every refugee was a spy, every settlement a monitoring post. The humans now had observers embedded throughout the entire Corvani occupation zone. "Impressive, isn't it?" Hyunwoo's voice came over the communication system again. "We call it human intelligence, not artificial. Intelligence, Commander. Human intelligence, the kind that comes from 8 billion minds working together." Velthar's blood ran cold. 8 billion minds. Every human on the planet was now potentially part of their intelligence network. "Your supply convoy to Sector 7 is running 12 minutes late," Hyunwoo continued conversationally. "Mechanical. Problems with the lead transport, I believe. Grandma Park sends her regards." The convoy in question was classified information known only to Velthar's senior staff. But somehow an elderly human refugee had observed it, analyzed it, and reported it back to their command center. "Oh, and Commander," Hyunwoo's voice carried a note of amusement, "you might want to check your eastern perimeter. Young Dong-min has been quite busy there." The transmission ended, leaving Velthar staring at the communication device in growing horror. Then the explosions began. The first blast came from the Eastern Ammunition Depot, a facility that should have been impossible to approach undetected. The explosion lit up the night sky and sent shockwaves through the ground that could be felt for kilometers. Within minutes, secondary explosions began as stored munitions detonated in chain reactions. But that was just the beginning. Over the next hour, explosions erupted across the occupied zone. Supply depots, communication arrays, vehicle pools, command centers, all of them hit with surgical precision. The attacks weren't random. They were coordinated, timed to maximize chaos and minimize the Corvani ability to respond. And leading them all was a 17-year-old human named Dongmin. Velthar first saw him on the security recordings, recovered from the eastern perimeter. The cameras had captured a young human male moving through the Corvani positions like a ghost. He avoided patrols with impossible precision, disabled security systems without triggering alarms, and placed explosives with the skill of a trained demolitions expert. But most disturbing of all were the messages he left behind. After each attack, Dongmin would leave a small note written in perfect Corvani script. The messages were always personal, always addressed directly to Velthar. "Commander, your fuel depot had poor security. I've taken the liberty of improving it. DM." Or, "Commander, your communication array was vulnerable to interference. I've solved that problem for you. DM." The psychological effect was devastating. Velthar's officers began to jump at shadows, afraid to make any move that might be anticipated and countered. The mighty Corvani military, veterans of 100 conquests, were being outmaneuvered by a human teenager who treated war like an elaborate puzzle. "He's not just fighting us," Velthar told his staff during an emergency meeting. "He's demonstrating that he can predict our every move. He wants us to know that we're not fighting a battle anymore. We're performing in his personal game." The final message came 3 days later, painted in glowing letters across the hull of Velthar's own command ship. "Commander Velthar, thank you for the tactical exercises. We've learned so much about Corvani doctrine. Tomorrow, we begin the real war. Sleep well. DM." That night, Velthar didn't sleep at all. He stood at his observation deck, staring out at the human city that should have been starving and demoralized. Instead, it blazed with lights, its defenders clearly well supplied and organized. The siege had failed completely, but worse than that, it had become a training exercise for the humans. They had turned the most basic of military tactics, the siege, into a learning opportunity, and now they were ready to show the Corvani what they had learned. The real war was about to begin. The 18 months that followed were unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Velthar had commanded forces in 47 different campaigns across the galaxy, fighting species that ranged from the crystalline shard warriors of Vega Prime to the energy beings of the null dimension. But nothing had prepared him for fighting humans. Each month brought new horrors, new impossibilities. The humans didn't just adapt to Corvani tactics, they improved on them. They studied every weapon, every strategy, every psychological pressure point the Corvani used, then turned those lessons into devastating counterattacks. By month 6, the Corvani had lost 3 major cities, not through direct assault, but because the humans had learned to make the very air toxic to Corvani physiology. By month 12, entire battalions were abandoning their posts rather than face human defensive positions that seemed to predict their every move. And by month 16, Velthar was receiving casualty reports that defied all logic and military doctrine. But it was the capture of Settlement Gamma 7 that broke something fundamental in the Corvani war machine. The settlement was small, barely 3,000 humans living in what appeared to be a farming community. Intelligence reports showed no military installations, no defensive fortifications, no strategic value whatsoever. It should have been routine to capture and hold as a forward base. Velthar personally led the assault force, hoping that direct involvement would boost morale among his increasingly demoralized troops. The settlement surrendered without firing a shot. The humans simply walked out of their homes with their hands raised, led by their local administrator, a middle-aged woman who identified herself as Sunja. "We surrender unconditionally," she had said in perfect Corvani, bowing respectfully. "We ask only that you treat us according to the Galactic Combat Accords." It was exactly what the Corvani expected from a defeated population. Sunja was calm, cooperative, and seemed genuinely interested in making the occupation as smooth as possible. She provided detailed information about the settlement's infrastructure, helped establish supply lines, and even assisted in setting up the Corvani command post. For the first week, everything went perfectly. The settlement's humans went about their daily routines under Corvani supervision. They farmed their crops, maintained their equipment, and caused no trouble whatsoever. Velthar began to think that perhaps they had finally found a human population that understood the futility of resistance. He was catastrophically wrong. The first sign of trouble came from Lieutenant Kazthar, a young officer who had been assigned to patrol the settlement's market district. He reported to the medical bay complaining of severe headaches and visual disturbances. "The colors, sir," he had said, his 4 eyes darting nervously around the room. "The humans, they've changed something about their colors. The market stalls, the clothing, even the signs on their buildings. Looking at them makes my head feel like it's splitting open." Velthar had dismissed it as stress-related illness. Combat fatigue was common among troops who had been fighting humans for over a year. But then more reports came in. Soldiers experiencing seizures while walking through certain areas of the settlement. Others complaining of nausea and disorientation. When entering human buildings, that's when he decided to investigate personally. The moment Velthar stepped into the settlement's main street, he understood what was happening. The humans had indeed changed their colors, but not randomly. Every surface, every piece of clothing, every decorative element had been carefully chosen to create specific visual patterns that interfered with Corvani optical processing. Sunjar was waiting for him in the market square, standing next to a fruit vendor's stall that seemed to pulse and writhe, even though nothing was actually moving. The effect was so disorienting that Velthar had to steady himself against a nearby wall. "Commander," Sunjar said pleasantly, "I was hoping you would come see our improvements. We've been working very hard to make our settlement more welcoming." To our Corvani guests, the innocent way she said it made Velthar's blood run cold. This wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, calculated psychological warfare designed specifically to target Corvani physiology. "How?" he managed to ask, fighting off another wave of nausea. "Oh, we've been studying your species very carefully," Sunjar replied, her tone remaining conversational. "Did you know that Corvani eyes process visual information differently than human eyes? Your 4-eye configuration creates interesting blind spots when exposed to certain color combinations." She gestured to the market stalls around them. "It took us about 2 weeks to figure out which combinations worked best. We tested different patterns on your patrols, made small adjustments based on their reactions. The children were particularly helpful. They're very good at observing and reporting back." Velthar realized with growing horror that every human in the settlement had been conducting experiments on his troops. The cooperative farmers, the helpful administrators, even the children playing in the streets had all been gathering data on Corvani weaknesses. But visual disorientation was just the beginning, Sunjar continued, leading him deeper into the settlement. "We discovered that certain sound frequencies cause resonance in your carapaces. Watch this." She clapped her hands twice, and suddenly every human in the market square began humming in perfect harmony. The sound was beautiful to human ears, but to Velthar it felt like his entire body was vibrating apart. The frequency they had chosen caused his carapace to resonate at exactly the right pitch to cause maximum discomfort. "Stop!" he gasped, falling to his knees as the vibrations intensified. "Oh, that's nothing," Sunjar said, signaling the humans to stop their humming. "We've also been working on scent-based applications. Did you know that certain combinations of earth flowers can trigger premature molting in your species? We've planted them all around the settlement." As if summoned by her words, a breeze carried the scent of what smelled like ordinary flowers to human senses. But to Velthar it was like being hit with a biological weapon. His carapace began to itch uncontrollably, the first sign of an unwanted molting cycle. "How is this possible?" he demanded, struggling to his feet. "You're a teacher, a civilian. You've never held a weapon." "That's exactly right," Sunjar agreed. "I'm a teacher. For 20 years I've been teaching children how to observe, how to learn, how to adapt. Did you think those skills would disappear just because you invaded our world?" She gestured to the humans around them, all of whom were watching the exchange with calm interest. "Every person in this settlement is a teacher now, Commander. We're all teaching each other how to study your species, how to understand your weaknesses, how to turn your own biology against you." "But the combat accords forbid biological warfare," Velthar protested weakly. "We're not using biological weapons," Sunja replied with a smile. "We're using flowers, colors, and songs, all perfectly natural things that exist in harmony on our world. It's not our fault that your species reacts poorly to them." The casual way she dismantled his objections was perhaps the most terrifying thing of all. Sunja wasn't just defeating his forces, she was doing it while maintaining complete moral authority. The humans had found ways to wage war without technically violating any laws or treaties. "This is just one settlement," Velthar said desperately. "You can't possibly coordinate this across your entire planet." "Can't we?" Sunja asked, pulling out a small communication device. "Hello, this is Sunja in Settlement Gamma 7. I'm here with Commander Velthar. Could you give him a demonstration of our coordination?" The device crackled to life with voices from across the planet. Dozens of human settlements reported in, each one describing how they had implemented Sunja's discoveries. The color patterns had been copied everywhere. The sound frequencies had been standardized. The flower arrangements had been planted in every human community. "You see, Commander," Sunja explained, "when you're fighting a species that shares information instantly across the entire planet, every discovery becomes a weapon that can be deployed everywhere at once. What I learned here in our little farming community, every human on Terra knows within hours." Velthar stared at the communication device in growing horror. The humans weren't just sharing tactical information, they were sharing biological warfare, techniques disguised as interior decorating and gardening tips. "We've been doing this for 18 months, Sunja continued. "Learning how your species thinks, how you move, how you react to different stimuli. Every encounter with your forces has been a learning opportunity. Every battle has been a classroom." She looked directly at him, with eyes that held no hatred, no anger, only the terrible patience of a teacher dealing with a slow student. "We're not trying to destroy you, Commander. We're trying to teach you something very important. Earth is our classroom, and every species that enters it becomes part of our curriculum." The war had dragged on for 18 brutal months, but Velthar knew it was ending long before the humans officially declared victory. His fleet, once the pride of the Corvani Empire, had been reduced to a fraction of its original strength. Ships limped through space with patched hulls and failing systems. Crews suffered from conditions that human settlements had somehow made, endemic throughout the occupied territories. But it wasn't the military losses that broke Veltar's spirit. It was the realization that his enemy had been studying him personally throughout the entire conflict. The revelation came at 0347 hours ship time during what should have been the deepest part of the night cycle. Velthar was alone in his command, quarters aboard the flagship Void's Edge, reviewing casualty reports that made less sense with each passing day. How could a species barely into space travel consistently outmaneuver forces that had conquered half the galaxy? That's when his personal communication console activated without authorization. The device should have been impossible to access remotely. It was isolated from all ship networks, encrypted with quantum locks that changed every few seconds, and physically shielded behind layers of military-grade security. Yet somehow, a human face appeared on the screen as clearly as if he was sitting in the same room. "Good evening, Commander Velthar," the human said in perfect Corvani. "I hope I'm not disturbing your rest. My name is Tae-hyun, and I think it's time we had a conversation." Velthar's first instinct was to sound the alarm, to call security, to treat this as the massive breach of protocol it clearly was. But something in the human's expression stopped him. This wasn't a desperate enemy attempting a final gambit. This was someone who held all the cards and was simply choosing to reveal them. "How did you access this channel?" Velthar demanded, his voice tight, with controlled panic. "Oh, that," Tae-hyun replied with casual dismissal. "We've had access to your personal systems for about 14 months now. We've been listening to your private logs, reading your tactical assessments, even monitoring your biometric data during stress events. Did you know your carapace temperature rises exactly 3.7 degrees when you're particularly frustrated?" The casual invasion of privacy was staggering, but what terrified Velthar more was the implication. If they could access his personal systems, what else could they reach? "Before the war, I was a starship engineer," Tae-hyun continued, settling back in what appeared to be a comfortable chair. "I specialized in life support systems. Fascinating technology, really. the delicate balance of atmospheric composition, temperature control, radiation shielding. Remove any one component and biological life becomes impossible very quickly. Velthar felt his blood turn to ice. What are you saying? I'm saying that for the past 6 months, every breath you and your crew have taken has been by human permission, Taehyun replied matter-of-factly. We could have ended this war at any time simply by turning off your air recyclers. But that seemed rather crude, don't you think? To prove his point, Taehyun made a small gesture with his hand. Immediately, alarms began blaring throughout the ship as life support systems across the entire fleet experienced simultaneous failures. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in red as backup systems struggled to compensate. Velthar watched his environmental displays with growing horror. Oxygen levels dropping, carbon dioxide scrubbers offline, temperature regulation failing. Across 17 dreadnoughts, 43 cruisers, and 200 support vessels, over 500,000 Corvani warriors were suddenly faced with the prospect of suffocation in the cold vacuum of space. 30 seconds, Taehyun announced, consulting what appeared to be a simple wrist chronometer. That's how long Corvani physiology can function in a carbon dioxide-rich environment before permanent neurological damage begins. We've tested this extensively. 20 seconds. Velthar could hear his crew shouting orders in the corridors, desperately trying to restore systems that no longer responded to their commands. 15 seconds. His own breathing was becoming labored as the atmospheric processes continued to fail. 10 seconds. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically as the ship's computer tried to contain what it interpreted as a catastrophic system failure. 5 seconds. Velthar's vision began to blur as oxygen deprivation affected his nervous system. Then, as suddenly as they had failed, every life support system in the fleet came back online. The alarms stopped. The lights returned to normal. Fresh, breathable, atmosphere flooded back through the ventilation systems. And that, Taehyun said calmly, is why this war is over. Velthar collapsed into his command chair, his carapace trembling with the aftermath of near death. Around him, he could hear his crew's confused voices as they tried to understand what had just happened. But Velthar understood perfectly. The humans had just demonstrated absolute control over the most basic requirement for Corvani survival. We could have killed you all 18 months ago, Taehyun continued. The first week after your arrival, we had already identified the vulnerabilities in your environmental systems. By the second week, we had developed delivery methods for atmospheric toxins that would have been undetectable until it was too late. By the third week, we had synthesized biological agents specifically designed to target Corvani respiratory systems. The engineer leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. But we didn't use any of those weapons, Commander. Do you know why? Velthar could barely speak. Why? Because we wanted to understand you first, Taehyun replied. Humans have a saying, know your enemy. But we took it further than that. We wanted to know everything about your species, your culture, your way of thinking. This entire war has been our education in Corvani military doctrine. The implications were staggering. Every battle, every engagement, every tactical maneuver the Corvani had made had been observed, analyzed, and catalogued by human researchers. The war itself had been turned into a massive learning exercise. We learned how you conduct orbital bombardments, how you establish ground positions, how you manage supply lines and coordinate fleet movements, Taehyun continued. We studied your command structure, your communication protocols, your response, patterns under stress. Most importantly, we learned how to predict your behavior. On cue, Velthar's tactical display activated, showing a detailed map of Corvani positions throughout the star system. But overlaid on that map were human projections of where each unit would move next, what tactics they would employ, and how they would respond to various scenarios. The predictions were accurate down to individual ship movements. Every decision you've made in the past 18 months has been anticipated and planned for, Taehyun explained. Your retreat to the outer system's asteroid field, your attempt to establish a supply base on the fourth planet's moon, even your personal habit of reviewing casualty reports during the night cycle. We've been watching it all, learning from it all. Velthar stared at the display, seeing his own predictability, laid out in devastating detail. "What do you want?" "We want you to leave," Tae-hyun said simply. "Take your fleet, return to Corvani space, and never come back. But more than that, we want you to deliver a message to every species in this galaxy." The human's expression became deadly serious. Earth is no longer just a world to be conquered. It's become a school, a place where the galaxy's most dangerous species comes to learn about warfare. "You were our first students, Commander, but you won't be our last." Tae-hyun gestured, and new images appeared on the screen. Human ships, sleek and advanced, moving through space with purpose and precision. But these weren't military vessels. They were exploration ships, diplomatic transports, and most ominously, teacher vessels. "We're already spreading across the galaxy," Tae-hyun explained. "Not as conquerors, but as educators. We're going to teach other species what we learned from you. How to analyze an enemy's weaknesses, how to turn their own technology against them, how to win wars through understanding rather than brute force." The screen showed images of various alien species, all of them engaged in what appeared to be training exercises, using distinctly human tactics. The implications were terrifying. If humans could defeat the Corvani through superior understanding and adaptation, what would happen when they taught those same skills to other species? "The age of predictable warfare is ending, Commander," Tae-hyun said, his voice carrying the weight of inevitable change. "Soon every species in this galaxy will fight like humans. They'll adapt like humans. They'll learn like humans. And when that happens, the old ways of conducting war will become obsolete." Velthar understood now why he felt so broken, so defeated. It wasn't just that his fleet had been outmaneuvered. It was that his entire species' approach to warfare had been rendered obsolete by creatures who had turned fighting itself into a science. "You have 24 hours to leave this system," Tae-hyun concluded. "After that, we'll consider your continued presence an act of aggression and respond accordingly. But remember, Commander, you're not leaving because you were defeated. You're leaving because you've served your purpose as our teachers." The transmission ended, leaving Velthar alone with the terrible knowledge of what humanity represented. They weren't just another species to be conquered or negotiated with. They were evolution itself, spreading through the galaxy and teaching every other species how to transcend their limitations. As he gave the orders to retreat, Velthar knew that the galaxy would never be the same. The humans had learned how to fight from the Corvani, and now they would teach those lessons to everyone else. The age of human warfare was about to begin. The end.